I stood in the center of my brother's merger party, while he labeled me the family failure, and 200 guests laughed. They thought I was begging for a handout, but I was actually there to spring a trap. My brother thinks he is signing a billion-dollar deal when he is really signing a prison sentence. Tonight, the manual laborer they despise is the only person who can save our father's retirement from being drained. My name is Chloe Watson, and if you looked at the guest list for tonight, you would find my name buried at the bottom, likely penciled in as an afterthought. I stood near the back of the room, my back pressing against the cold, polished plaster of a column I knew intimately well because my crew had installed the structural reinforcements behind it 3 years ago, but nobody here knew that. To the 200 people crowding into the gilded ballroom of the St. Regis, I was just the sister, the disappointments. The one who played in the dirt while the adults did business. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and the distinct metallic tang of ambition. It was my brother's night. Ethan Watson, the golden boy. He stood on the raised platform at the front of the room, the spotlight catching the sheen of his silk tie and the perfect sweep of his dark hair. He looked like every cent of the success my parents had prayed for, invested in, and sculpted him to be. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan's voice boomed through the speakers, confident and smooth, the voice of a man about to close the deal of a lifetime. "Thank you for being here to witness history. This merger isn't just about numbers, it is about legacy." He raised his champagne flute. The crystal sparkled under the chandeliers. "To my incredible wife, Sloane," he said, gesturing to the woman standing a few feet away from him. Sloane beamed, her smile practiced and porcelain perfect, draped in a silver gown that probably cost more than my first work truck. "My rock, my muse." Applause rippled through the room, polite, respectful. "To my mother, Cynthia," Ethan continued, his voice softening with theatrical gratitude. "The woman who taught me that excellence is not an act, but a habit." My mother, seated at the VIP table, dipped her head graciously. She was wearing her signature pearls, her posture rigid, her eyes shining with the validation she craved more than oxygen. She looked like a queen mother surveying her kingdom. Then, the pause, the shift in tone. I knew it was coming. It was part of the script. It always was. "And, of course," Ethan chuckled, scanning the back of the room until his eyes locked on me. The spotlight didn't follow him, but the eyes of the crowd did. "My little sister, Chloe. Where are you hiding?" "Chloe probably near the potted plants. Right? She feels more at home with the vegetation than the venture capitalists." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It wasn't malicious, not from the strangers, but it was dismissive. It was the sound of people being given permission to look down on someone. "Chloe is our free spirit," Ethan said, grinning as he loosened the top button of his jacket. "We are closing a $100 million merger tonight, and I think the last time I saw Chloe, she was ankle-deep in mud trying to save a dying shrub. Honestly, folks, if you smell something earthy, it's probably just my sister. She never quite scrubs the dirt off." The laughter grew louder. It was a roar now. 200 wealthy, influential people were chuckling at the image of the dirty little sister. It was a joke they understood the gap between the executive and the laborer, the mind and the hands. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, a small, polite smile frozen on my face. It was a mask I had been perfecting for 20 years. The heat rushed up my neck, burning my cheeks, a visceral, physical reaction to the humiliation. But I refused to let it reach my eyes. I looked at my mother. Cynthia Watson was not laughing. That would be undignified. Instead, she was looking at Ethan with a soft, indulgent expression, and then she glanced at me. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a confirmation. Yes, the nod said, "This is your place, Chloe. This is who you are." The punchline that makes him shine brighter. That nod hurt more than the laughter. It was the silent seal of approval on my public shaming. "But seriously," Ethan said, raising his glass higher, signaling the end of the roast. "To family, even the messy ones. To family," the crowd echoed. They drank. I did not. I kept my eyes on Ethan as the music swelled and the crowd broke into smaller clusters. I watched him step down from the stage, instantly surrounded by backslappers and handshakers. He was the center of the universe, but from my vantage point, leaning against the column in the shadows, I saw something the sycophants missed. My brother was terrified. It was subtle, but I knew Ethan better than anyone. I knew the way he ticked, as he laughed at a joke from a banking CEO. His left hand, the one holding his phone, was trembling. It was a fine, high-frequency tremor. He wasn't just checking the time. He was obsessively refreshing his screen, every 30 seconds. His eyes darted down to the device, his pupils dilated, panic flickering behind the charismatic facade before he quickly shoved the phone back into his pocket. And he was drinking, fast. Ethan liked to play the connoisseur, sipping scotch and swirling it to admire the legs. But tonight, he was knocking back champagne like it was water in a desert. He signaled a waiter for a refill before his glass was even empty. His laughter was a little too loud, a little too sharp at the edges. "Chloe?" The voice was like silk wrapped around a razor blade. I turned to see Sloane standing there, up close. Her silver dress looked like liquid armor. She held her wineglass by the stem, her manicured fingers terrifyingly precise. "Sloane," I said, keeping my voice even. "Congratulations. The speech was lively." "Oh, don't be sensitive," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Ethan is just stressed. It's a big night. Besides, it humanizes him to have a quirky family member. It makes him relatable." She stepped closer, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I was wearing a charcoal gray jumpsuit, tailored and sharp, made from high-end Italian wool. It was professional, elegant, and understated, but under Sloane's gaze, I might as well have been wearing a burlap sack. "This is so you," she said, tilting her head. "It's very practical, sturdy. It really says, 'I am ready to lift something heavy at a moment's notice. It is sweet that you try to blend in.' Chloe, really?" "It is wool, Sloane," I said. "Not denim." "Of course it is," she smiled, a predator showing its teeth. "But you know what I mean. You just have that aura of labor. It clings to you." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't think one was necessary. She turned her back to me to flag down a waiter, dismissing me as effectively as if I were a piece of furniture. I took a breath, letting the anger settle in my gut like a heavy stone. I needed that weight. It kept me grounded. "I wouldn't let her get to you. She thinks empathy is a brand of handbag." I turned toward the new voice, though I already knew who it belonged to. The stomach drop sensation was familiar. Kyle Denton stood there, swirling a glass of red wine. He looked older, but in the way rich men age better, sharper. His suit was midnight blue, tailored to within an inch of its life. He was the man I had loved for 3 years, the man who had eventually left me because, in his words, I lacked a trajectory. "Hello, Kyle," I said. "Chloe," he said, stepping into my personal space. He looked me over, not with Sloane's disdain, but with a pity that was infinitely worse. "I saw you during the speech. Took it like a champ. Ethan can be a lot. But hey, he is the guy closing the merger, right?" "He certainly is the guy with the microphone," I said. Kyle chuckled, shaking his head. "You still have that edge. I always like that. But look around. Chloe, this is the big leagues. I heard you're still doing the landscaping thing, plants and patios." "Something like that," I said. "That's cute," he said. The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. "Listen, I am actually looking to put some capital into this merger. Ethan's numbers look solid. If this goes through, everyone wins. Maybe you should ask him for a role in the new setup reception. Administration's something to get you out of the sun. It is not too late to get a real career. Chloe, you are what, 35 now? Clock is ticking." My hands tightened into fists at my sides, but I forced them to relax. "I am happy where I am, Kyle," I said, "and I think you should check those numbers again before you write a check." He laughed, a dismissive bark. "Always the cynic. You simply don't understand high finance. Chloe, stick to the flower beds." He patted my shoulder, a patronizing tap, 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 and walked away. Heading straight for the VIP section where my brother was holding court, I watched him go, a bitter taste in my mouth. Stick to the flower beds. I turned away from the crowd and walked toward the massive glass doors that led to the terrace. I needed air, and ironically, the terrace was the only place here where I felt genuine pride. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the cool night air. The noise of the party faded slightly, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic sound of falling water. The terrace was magnificent. It was a multi-level design featuring floating limestone pavers, integrated LED lighting that mimicked starlight, and a complex, 3-tier water feature that circulated recycled rainwater through a filtration system hidden beneath the deck. Most of the guests walked right past it, Some flicked cigarette ash into the planters I had selected for their drought resistance. They saw a floor. They saw decoration. I saw the engineering. I saw the load-bearing calculations required to support the limestone on a cantilevered edge. I saw the drainage gradients I had argued over with the city inspectors for 3 weeks. I saw the thousands of man-hours my company, Watson Grounds Civic Design, had poured into this project 2 years ago. The hotel management didn't know I was the sister of the man inside. They only knew me as Ms. Watson, the CEO of the firm that transformed their exterior architecture. But to my family, to Kyle, to the 200 people inside, I was just the girl who played in the dirt. They walked on my work, mocked my profession, and had no idea that the very ground beneath their Italian leather shoes was designed, approved, and built by the failure of the family. I walked to the edge of the stone railing, looking out over the city lights. "The limestone is Turkish, isn't it?" The voice came from the shadows at the far end of the terrace. I started slightly, turning to see a figure sitting on one of the teak benches. He was an older man, perhaps 70, dressed in a tuxedo that looked older than he was but cut with a timeless elegance. He held a cane with a silver handle, his hands resting on it calmly. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the water feature. "Yes," I said, surprised. "Limestone from the Anatolia region. High density, less porous than the domestic variety. It holds up better against the freeze-thaw cycle of the winters here." The man turned his head slowly. He had eyes that were dark, intelligent, and completely devoid of the drunken gloss that covered everyone else's eyes tonight. He looked like a hawk perched on a wire. "I thought so," he said. His voice was gravelly and low. "Most people would have used concrete pavers and charged the client for stone. Whoever built this had integrity." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. It wasn't the look of a man seeing a woman, or a rich man seeing a servant. It was the look of a mechanic assessing an engine. "You are the sister," he stated, not a question. "I am," I said. "They laughed at you in there," he said. He didn't say it with pity. He said it like he was reading a weather report. "They did. And yet," the man said, gesturing with his chin toward the glass doors where Ethan was visible, frantically drinking another glass of champagne, "you are standing here admiring the structural integrity of a balcony, and your brother is in there sweating through a $3,000 suit." I froze. He had seen it too. "He is nervous," the man observed. "A man who is about to make $20 million is usually happy. A man who is about to lose everything is usually manic. Your brother is manic." I stepped closer. "Who are you?" "Just an observer," he said. "I have spent 40 years in banking. I know the look of a man who is juggling knives, and I know the look of a woman who is tired of being the punchline." He stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. He walked past me, stopping for a moment to look at the water feature again. "Enjoy the party, Ms. Watson," he said softly. "But if I were you, I would not stand too close to your brother when the music stops. Blast zones can be unpredictable." He walked back inside, disappearing into the crowd of laughing, oblivious people. I stood alone on the terrace I had built, in the shadow of the brother who despised me, while the man I used to love courted financial ruin. I looked through the glass. Ethan was laughing, his head thrown back, his hand gripping the shoulder of a potential investor. Mom was clapping her hands, delighted. Sloane was posing for a photo. They looked so invincible, so shiny. I touched the cold, rough surface of the limestone railing. It was real. It was solid. It was mine. Let them laugh, I thought, a cold calm settling over me like a blanket. Let them call me a failure. Let them joke about the dirt on my hands. Tonight, I do not need them to believe me. I do not need them to respect me. I just need them to be listening when the floor drops out from under them. I turned and walked back toward the doors, fixing the polite smile back onto my face. The trap was set, even if I didn't know the full shape of it yet. But I knew one thing for certain by the time the sun came up tomorrow. Nobody would be laughing at the gardener. To understand why I stood on that terrace letting my own brother roast me alive. You have to understand the truck. I drive a 2018 Ford F-150. It is charcoal gray, dusty more often than not, with a bedliner that has been scratched to hell by pallets of stone and rebar. To my family, that truck is a rolling billboard for failure. It represents manual labor. It represents the fact that while Ethan was studying derivatives at Wharton, I was studying soil composition at a state university. When I pull up to my parents' driveway in that truck, I can see my mother, Cynthia, twitch behind the curtains. She hates that it parks next to her pristine Mercedes. She hates that it implies I work with my hands. She has no idea that the truck is paid off. She has no idea that the fleet of 12 other heavy-duty vehicles I own are also paid off. I am 35 years old. To the guests inside that ballroom, and to my own flesh and blood, I am Chloe the gardener. I am the one who plays in the mud. I am the black sheep who just could not quite grasp the sophistication of the corporate world. The truth is a little more complicated. I own Watson Grounds Civic Design. I do not just mow lawns. My firm handles large-scale municipal contracts. We design drainage systems for city parks so they do not flood during the hurricane season. We restructure urban green spaces to reduce heat islands in downtown districts. We restore wetlands that developers have destroyed. I have a full-time crew of 42 people, including 3 licensed landscape architects and a civil engineer. Last year, my company cleared $4 million in revenue. My personal take-home pay was significantly higher than Ethan's base salary, but I never told them. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a plot point in a bad movie. But for me, it was a survival mechanism. 10 years ago, when I started the business with a loan I scraped together myself, I tried to share my small wins. I remember coming home to dinner, covered in dust, but beaming because I had landed my first $50,000 contract for a library garden. I sat at the table, ready to celebrate. But before I could speak, Ethan announced he had been promoted to junior associate. My mother had gasped, clapped her hands, and opened a bottle of wine she had been saving. My father had shaken Ethan's hand with a gravity he never showed me. When I finally mentioned my contract, my mother had smiled that tight, pitying smile. She patted my hand and said that was nice, dear, and maybe if I worked hard enough, I could eventually hire someone to do the digging for me so I would not ruin my fingernails. That was the moment I stopped sharing. I realized then that in the Watson family, love was a currency, and the exchange rate was based on prestige. Ethan dealt in gold. I dealt in copper. If I told them I was successful now, if I told them I was a millionaire in my own right, the dynamic would not shift to respect. It would shift to transaction. My mother would start suggesting I pay for the vacations. Ethan would start asking for investments in his risky schemes. They would not love me more. They would just use me more. So I let them keep their narrative. I let them believe I was scraping by. I let Ethan slip me a $100 bill at Christmas with a smug whisper, telling me to buy myself something nice. I took it, and I put it in a jar, and I swallowed my pride because I wanted them to love me for me, not for my bank account. I wanted the impossible. Ethan is 39. He is the sun our family orbits around. From the time he was 6, he was told he was destined for greatness. My parents leveraged their house, their retirement, and their sanity to push him through the right schools and into the right rooms. Every phone call with my mother follows the same script. She does not ask how I am. She tells me what Ethan is doing. Ethan is leading a new team. Ethan is looking at a penthouse. Ethan is stressed because he is so important. It is exhausting. It is a slow, dripping torture that erodes your sense of self-worth. Yet, I am still here. Why did I come tonight? That is the question I asked myself as I stood in front of my closet 3 hours ago. I came because I remember a different Ethan. I remember the Ethan who was 12 when I was 8, who beat up a neighborhood kid for pushing me off my bike. I remember the Ethan who used to sit on the roof with me and talk about how we would buy a huge house where Mom and Dad could not yell at us about grades. That Ethan is buried somewhere under the layers of expensive suits and corporate greed, and a foolish, childish part of me keeps hoping I can dig him out. I keep hoping that one day, he will look at me and see his sister, not a prop he can use to make himself look taller. Getting dressed for this party was a strategic operation. It always is. If I dressed too nicely, if I wore the brands I can actually afford, the silk, the cashmere, the designer heels, my mother would make a comment about me being irresponsible with my money. She would ask if I bought it at a thrift store, or worse, Sloan would accuse me of trying to upstage her. But if I dressed too simply, I would be playing right into their hands. I would be the poor relation looking for a free meal. So I chose the middle ground, the charcoal jumpsuit. It was utilitarian but sharp. It covered my tattoos of fern on my shoulder, a topographic map on my ribcage, and it allowed me to move. I needed to feel ready to move, because despite my hope, despite the nostalgia, my gut has been screaming at me for weeks. It started with small things. My father, Graham, is 73. He is a gentleman, a retired history teacher who loves jazz and crossword puzzles. But lately, he has looked hollowed out. When I go over to fix their sprinklers or clean their gutters because, of course, The gardener daughter does the free maintenance. He follows me around. He hovers. He asks vague questions about money. Chloe, is business okay, Chloe? Do you think banks are safe? He never finishes the thought. My mother usually interrupts, shooing him away like a nuisance, telling him not to bother me with things I wouldn't understand. She handles the finances, or rather, she hands the finances to Ethan, and Ethan handles them. That is the terrifying part. Ethan has been managing my parents' retirement portfolio for 5 years. They sold their large house, downsized to a condo, and gave him the surplus to invest. They trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't they? He is the golden boy. He is the merger specialist. But a gardener notices things. We notice when the soil quality changes before the leaves turn yellow. We notice the rot at the root before the tree falls. 2 weeks ago, I saw a letter on my parents' kitchen counter. It was from the IRS. My mother snatched it away before I could read the header, claiming it was just a mistake. A clerical error Ethan was fixing, but her hands were shaking. Then there was the phone call from Ethan last Tuesday. He called me at 2 a.m. He sounded drunk, or manic, or both. He asked if I had any cash on hand. Not $100. He asked if I had $5,000. He said it was for a surprise for Sloan, but his voice was tight with panic. I lied and told him I didn't have it. He hung up without saying goodbye. That was the moment I stopped being just a sister and started being a CEO. I didn't just buy a dress and show up tonight. I made a phone call. Tessa Monroe is one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in the city. Her firm usually handles my zoning disputes and contract negotiations. The kind of boring, high-level legal work that keeps my company running. I called her personal line on Thursday. I need an appointment, I had told her. Not for the business, personal, family. Trouble, she had asked. I think my brother is in trouble, I said, and I think he's going to try to use my father as a life raft. We have a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday morning. I haven't told anyone, not my parents, certainly not Ethan. To them, I am just Chloe, standing by the buffet table, probably hoping to take some leftovers home. They have no idea that I have retained counsel. They have no idea that the failure of the family understands forensic accounting better than they think. I watched my mother across the room. She was laughing at something a tall man in a tuxedo was saying. She looked radiant, caught up in the glamour of the evening, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was likely made of quicksand. She trusts Ethan because she needs to. She needs him to be the success story, because if he isn't, then her entire life's work, her parenting, her favoritism, her sacrifices, was for nothing. She would rather go broke than admit she bet on the wrong horse. I took a sip of my sparkling water. It was warm. I don't know if this party will bury me or bury him. I don't know if I am walking into a family reunion or a crime scene. But as I watched Ethan wipe sweat from his forehead for the 10th time in an hour, I knew one thing for certain. The facade is cracking. The golden paint is peeling off, and when the truth finally breaks through the surface, it is going to be ugly. Nice jumpsuit, a voice sneered behind me. It was a woman I didn't know, a friend of Sloane's probably. Very industrial. I turned and gave her my best, sweetest, most vacant smile, the smile of the idiot sister. Thank you, I said. It has deep pockets. She laughed and walked away, thinking she had won. She didn't understand. I wasn't talking about fashion. I was talking about war, and in a war, you want the enemy to think you are unarmed until you are holding the knife to their throat. The ballroom had become a cage. Everywhere I turned, the air felt thinner, consumed by the collective ego of 200 people who believed they were the masters of the universe. I tried to navigate the perimeter of the room, keeping to the shadows near the service stations, but I had attracted a shadow of my own. Kyle Denton was sticking to me like burrs on denim. He had decided, in his infinite arrogance, that I was a project that needed saving. He walked half a step behind me, holding his wineglass like a scepter, leaning in to offer unsolicited life coaching every time I stopped to let a waiter pass. I am just saying, look at the logistics. Chloe, Kyle said, his voice dropping to that confidential, patronizing register that men use when explaining simple concepts to women they deem slow. Landscaping is a young person's game. It is physical. It is brutal on the joints. You are 35. What happens when you are 40? What happens when your back gives out? You have no equity. You have no safety net. I stopped and turned to him. I wanted to tell him that my safety net was a diversified portfolio of municipal bonds and high-yield index funds that I managed myself. I wanted to tell him that I had not lifted a shovel purely out of necessity in 5 years because I had crews for that. Instead, I took a sip of my tepid water. I have health insurance. Kyle, I manage, he chuckled, shaking his head as if I had told a cute joke. Health insurance is not a retirement plan. Chloe, look, I know you have your pride. You always did. But there is no shame in pivoting. I could make a few calls. I know a guy running a logistics firm in Jersey. They need dispatchers. It is a desk job. Air conditioning, benefits. It is not glamorous, but it is a step up from whatever this is. He gestured vaguely at my entire existence. I like the fresh air, I said, my voice flat. You are stubborn, he said, sighing. You know, that was always the problem. You never knew when to let someone help you up. I walked away before I said something that would ruin my cover. He did not follow me this time, likely spotting a tray of crab cakes that looked more appealing than my career prospects, but the relief was short-lived. As I rounded the corner near the ice sculpture, a melting, weeping swan that looked as miserable as I felt, I ran into the wall of perfume that was my sister-in-law. Sloane was holding court with 3 other women who looked like carbon copies of her. They all wore metallics. They all had hair that didn't move. They all held their clutches like weapons. Oh, here she is, Sloane chirped, reaching out to grab my forearm. Her nails dug into the fabric of my jumpsuit. Ladies, this is Ethan's sister, Chloe, the one I told you about. The 3 women looked at me with wide, predatory eyes. I was the exhibit. Sloane says you work with nature, one of them said. She made the word nature sound like sewage. I am in landscape design, I corrected gently. It is so rugged, Sloane interrupted, her smile tight. She lifted her arm, dangling a handbag that was covered in crystals. I was just telling the girls that I don't know how you do it, the dirt, the bugs. I broke a nail opening my car door yesterday and I almost cried. You are so brave, Chloe. I mean, really, to just not care about, you know. She gestured to her face, then to mine. She was telling me I was ugly, but she was wrapping it in a compliment about bravery. It was a masterclass in social violence. I think there is a dignity in building things, I said. Oh, absolutely, Sloane agreed, turning back to her friends. And it is so handy. Chloe, darling, while you are here, could you look at the orchid arrangement on table 4? It looks a little wilted. I thought maybe you could do your magic, poke the soil or whatever it is you do. My blood ran cold. She was asking me to prune the centerpieces at her husband's merger party. I think the hotel staff has that covered. Sloane, I said. Right, of course, she laughed, patting my arm again. I just thought you might want to feel useful, since, you know, business isn't really your language. She turned her back on me, dismissing me as effectively as one dismisses a servant. I stood there for a moment, listening to them discuss a spa retreat in Aspen, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. They were trying to hurt me, but they were failing. You cannot hurt a person when you don't even know who they are. They were mocking a ghost. A sudden hush fell over the room, the lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight swung toward the front platform. Ethan was back at the microphone. This was the main event, the pitch, the moment he was supposed to dazzle the investors and the acquiring partners. I moved to the side of the room, finding a spot where I could see both my brother and the reactions of the crowd. Ethan looked shiny. That was the only word for it. He was sweating through his makeup. He gripped the podium with both hands, his knuckles white. The future, Ethan announced, his voice booming a little too loudly. That is what we are buying tonight. Not a company, but a horizon. He clicked a remote, and a slide appeared on the massive screen behind him. It was a graph with an arrow pointing up. No numbers, just an arrow. Synergy, Ethan said. Vertical integration. We are looking at a paradigm shift in how we approach the market. When you combine our agility with their infrastructure, you don't just get growth, you get an explosion. I frowned. I had read the prospectus for his company. I knew the industry. He was throwing out buzzwords like confetti, hoping to blind them with jargon so they wouldn't notice the lack of substance. We have projected a 300% increase in market share by the 4th quarter of next year, Ethan said, clicking to another slide. This one had a picture of a rocket ship. I scanned the room. The guests were nodding, drinking their champagne, mesmerized by the show. But then I looked at the table near the front left. 3 men and 1 woman sat there. They were not smiling. They were not drinking. They were the representatives from the acquiring firm, the people Ethan needed to impress the most. They were exchanging glances. The woman leaned over and whispered something to the man next to her. He frowned and tapped his finger on the tablecloth. It was a subtle rhythm, a sign of impatience. I listened closer to Ethan's speech. He was talking fast, rushing through the fiscal year reviews. Q1 was strong, Ethan said. Q2 we saw some necessary restructuring costs, totally standard, and as we head into the new fiscal year, the projections are limitless. He had skipped Q3. He had completely jumped over the third quarter. In the financial world, silence is loud. You do not skip a quarter unless there is a crater in the balance sheet you are trying to hide. My eyes narrowed. Ethan was moving his hands wildly now, distracting them. We are talking about disrupting the ecosystem, he shouted. We are talking about legacy. He kept using that word. It was a shield. I tore my eyes away from the train wreck on stage and scanned the VIP table. I was looking for my father. I found Graham Watson sitting at the far end of the table. Isolated. He looked small in his tuxedo. His shoulders were hunched, and his eyes were glazed over. Staring at the untouched plate of salmon in front of him, he looked like a man who had forgotten where he was. My mother, Cynthia, was sitting next to him, but she wasn't with him. She was leaning forward, her eyes locked on Ethan, mouthing the words of his speech along with him. She was the stage mom, willing her son to succeed through sheer force of delusion. I saw my father reach for his wine glass. His hand was shaking a tremor I had noticed months ago but that he refused to discuss. The glass rattled against the charger plate. Before he could lift it, my mother's hand shot out. She grabbed his wrist. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a correction. She whispered something to him, her face tight with annoyance, and moved the glass out of his reach. She straightened his tie aggressively, treating him like an unruly child who was embarrassing her in church. My father shrank back. He nodded, obedient and defeated. Something inside me snapped. The insults from Sloane, the condescension from Kyle. I could take that, but seeing my father treated like a prop, silenced and controlled, broke through my composure. I started moving. I didn't care about the speech. I didn't care about the optics. I needed to check on him. I wove through the tables, ignoring the glares of people who were annoyed that I was moving during the important part. I got within 10 feet of the VIP table when a hand clamped onto my upper arm. It was Ethan. He had come down from the stage while the applause was still dying down, moving with the speed of a man fleeing a crime scene. He had intercepted me before I could reach our parents. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed. His breath smelled like stale alcohol and fear. "I am going to say hello to Dad," I said, looking pointedly at his hand on my arm. "He looks tired. Ethan, I want to make sure he's okay." "He is fine," Ethan snapped. "He is just old. Do not go over there and cause a scene." "Checking on my father is not a scene. It is tonight," Ethan said, his eyes wild. "Look at you. You look like you are about to fix the plumbing. I have the board members at that table. Chloe, I have the investors. I do not need my sister the digger going over there and talking about compost or asking for money." "I have never asked you for money," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But you asked me for $5,000 last Tuesday at 2 a.m, remember?" Ethan's face went pale. For a second, the arrogance vanished, replaced by sheer terror, but he recovered quickly, masking it with anger. "That was a misunderstanding," he stammered. "A temporary liquidity issue. It is resolved." "Is it?" I asked. "Because you skipped Q3 in your presentation, Ethan, and those people at the front table noticed." He gripped my arm tighter. "You do not know what you are talking about. Stick to what you know. Chloe, leave the finance to the adults." He looked over my shoulder and waved. Kyle, come here for a second." Kyle Denton appeared almost instantly, eager to be close to the man of the hour. "Kyle," Ethan said, putting on a fake, jovial smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. "My sister here is feeling a little aimless. You mentioned earlier you might have some openings, maybe something entry-level. I would really appreciate it if you could help her out. Give her a leg up. Family favors, right?" He was selling me out. He was using my humiliation as a bonding currency with Kyle. He was offering me up as a charity case to distract from the fact that I had just called him out on his financial lies. Kyle beamed, puffed up by the request. "Absolutely. Ethan, I was just telling her. I can have her filling out invoices by Monday. It is minimum wage to start, naturally, but there is room for growth if she applies herself." "Perfect," Ethan said, patting Kyle on the back. Then he looked at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "There you go. Chloe, problem solved. Now you have a purpose. Go talk to Kyle about your new job and leave the important people alone. Tonight is my night." He shoved past me, heading back toward the investors with his arms wide open, laughing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. I stood there, vibrating with rage. Kyle was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to thank him for the scraps. "I think I need some air," I said. "Don't take too long," Kyle called after me. "I want to explain the dress code for the warehouse." I turned and walked away. I walked past the laughing guests, past my preening mother, past my defeated father. I walked until I reached the glass doors of the terrace. I pushed them open and stepped out into the night. The silence of the terrace was a physical relief. The water feature I had designed was bubbling softly, a steady, reliable sound in a world of noise. I walked to the edge of the stone railing, gripping it until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march back inside and burn the whole place down with the truth. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Anger without a plan was just a tantrum. I needed leverage. "He is desperate." The voice came from the shadows. I turned. The older gentleman from earlier, the one who had admired the limestone, was standing by the water wall. He had not gone back inside. He had been waiting. He stepped into the light. He looked impeccable, ancient, and dangerous. He looked like old money, the kind that doesn't need to shout because it owns the silence. He lifted his cane and pointed it toward the glass doors, toward Ethan, who was now frantically refilling his glass. "A man who sells his own blood to buy favor is a man who has nothing left to sell," the old man said. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and knowing. "You saw it too," he said. "The missing quarter, the shaking hands, the way he is keeping your father isolated." "Who are you?" I asked again. He smiled, a dry, thin smile. "Someone who hates a bad investment, and someone who thinks it is time you stopped standing in the dark." He tilted his head toward the far end of the terrace, away from the windows, where the shadows were deepest. "Walk with me, Ms. Watson," he said. "I think there are things you need to hear, things that might help you turn that shovel of yours into a weapon." I looked back at the party one last time. I saw Kyle laughing at a joke I was sure was about me. I saw Ethan lying to a room full of people. I turned back to the old man. "Okay," I said, and I followed him into the dark. The silence on the far end of the terrace was heavy, a sharp contrast to the manufactured joy bubbling inside the ballroom. The air here was colder, biting through the thin fabric of my jumpsuit. But I did not shiver. I was too focused on the man standing next to me. He leaned against the stone balustrade with the ease of a man who owned the building, or perhaps the block. He took a slow drag from a cigar he had not yet lit, savoring the aroma of the tobacco before tucking it into his breast pocket. "Lawrence Halden," he said. He did not offer his hand. He said his name as if it were a headline, something I should recognize. I did. The name triggered a faint memory from the financial pages I scanned to keep track of the industry that fascinated my brother. Lawrence Halden was a legend in investment banking, a man known for surviving 3 recessions and coming out richer each time. He was supposed to be retired. He was supposed to be living on a private island, not standing on a hotel terrace in the middle of the city. "Chloe Watson," I replied, keeping my guard up. "I know," he said. He turned his gaze from the skyline to the pavement beneath our feet. He tapped the limestone with the ferrule of his cane. "You are the one who designed the drainage system for the reservoir project in the Heights, the one that won the Civic Design Award last year. I recognize the signature. You hide the utility in the aesthetic. You make the ugly parts do the work, while the pretty parts get the credit." I felt the air leave my lungs. For 3 hours, I had been the gardener, the failure, the poor relation. Now, a titan of industry was quoting my resume back to me. "You know my work," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I make it my business to know who actually builds the world," Lawrence said, "while people like your brother are busy selling the air rights above it." He turned fully toward me then. His face was a map of deep lines and sharp angles, illuminated by the ambient glow of the city. "You are wondering why I am here," he said. "My brother said you were a potential investor." I said. "He said everyone in that room is here to celebrate the merger." Lawrence let out a short, dry sound. It might have been a laugh, but it lacked any humor. "Celebration," he repeated, tasting the word with distaste. "That is what he calls it. I call it a fire sale." I stepped closer. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull hum, irrelevant against the gravity of his tone. "What do you mean?" I asked. Lawrence looked at the glass doors. Through the pane, we could see Ethan. He was animated, his arms wide, talking to the representatives from the acquiring firm. He looked successful, but Lawrence saw something else. "Look at his hands," Lawrence said softly. "Look at the way he keeps touching his tie. The way he checks the exits. Your brother is not climbing a mountain. Ms. Watson, he is jumping off a cliff and hoping he can knit a parachute before he hits the ground. The merger, I said. It is $1 billion deal. The numbers are fiction, Lawrence cut in. His voice was not loud, but it had the weight of a gavel striking wood. I still have friends in the regulatory agencies. Old friends. They talk, and the word on the street is not growth. It is investigation. My stomach turned over. Investigation. There are discrepancies in the books of his current firm, Lawrence said. Cash flow issues. Revenue recognized before it was earned. Expenses categorized as capital investments to hide the bleed. It is the oldest trick in the book. You inflate the balloon until it looks impressive, and you pray you can sell it to some idiot before it pops. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unyielding. He is not merging because he wants to expand. Chloe, he is merging because if he does not bury those old ledgers inside a new parent company within 30 days, the SEC is going to audit him, and if they audit him, he goes to prison. I stared at him. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face, but I didn't move to brush it away. Prison. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If he is a fraud, why are you here? Why not just let him drown? Because predators do not just drown, Lawrence said. They drag things down with them. When a man like Ethan is scared, when he is cornered, he does not look for a stranger to save him. He looks for the people who trust him. He looks for the people who will sign the paper without reading the fine print because they share his last name. He turned back to the window. He lifted his cane and pointed the silver tip directly at a figure sitting alone at the VIP table. My father. Graham Watson was staring at his empty wine glass. He looked small. He looked confused. He looked like a man who was waiting for permission to go home. Tell me, Lawrence said, his voice dropping to a murmur that chilled my blood. Does your brother help your father with his accounts? The question hung in the air between us. I closed my eyes. Memories from the last 6 months flooded my mind. Disjointed pieces of a puzzle I had been too afraid to assemble. I heard my father's voice from a Sunday dinner 2 months ago. I wanted to fix the roof. Chloe. But Ethan said the liquidity is a bit tight right now. He said the market is correcting. I heard my mother's voice, sharp and dismissive. Don't bother your father with bills. Chloe. Ethan moved everything into a managed trust. It is much simpler. I remembered the letter from the IRS on the counter, the one my mother had snatched away. I opened my eyes. I looked at Lawrence. Yes, I said. He manages everything. My parents sold their house. They gave him the proceeds to invest. Lawrence nodded slowly. It was a confirmation of a tragedy he had already predicted. Then you do not have time to be the polite sister anymore, he said, because that merger inside it is not going to close. The due diligence team from the buying firm is already suspicious. I saw them talking. They found the gap in the third quarter. They smell the rot. If the deal falls through, I started. If the deal falls through, Lawrence finished, Ethan will need to cover the hole in his own company's accounts before the auditors arrive. He will need cash, fast, untraceable cash, and he has access to a retirement fund that belongs to a man who signs whatever is put in front of him. I felt a wave of nausea. Ethan asked me for $5,000 because he was desperate. If he couldn't get it from me, if he couldn't get it from the merger, he is going to drain them, I whispered. He is going to take everything they have to save himself. He may have already started, Lawrence said. I looked at my father again. He was smiling now. A weak, vacant smile as Ethan patted him on the shoulder. Ethan was leaning down, whispering something in Dad's ear. Dad nodded. He trusted him. He loved him. I felt a sudden, violent urge to run through the glass, to grab my father and drag him out of the room. I took a step toward the door. Lawrence's cane hit the stone floor with a sharp clack. It was a command to stop. Do not, he said. I turned to him, my hands trembling. I have to stop him. I have to tell them. Tell them what? Lawrence asked. That a stranger on a terrace told you a story. That you have a bad feeling, look at them. Chloe, your mother worships the ground he walks on. Your father is conditioned to say yes. If you walk in there now and start screaming about fraud, they will not see a savior. They will see a jealous sister trying to ruin her brother's big night. Ethan will spin it. He will call you hysterical. He will say you are drunk, and they will believe him. He was right. I knew he was right. I had spent 35 years being the emotional one, the messy one, the one who didn't understand business. Ethan had spent 39 years being the golden child. My word against his was no contest. So what do I do? I asked. Do I just watch? No, Lawrence said. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small, heavy cardstock. He held it out to me. You fight him, but you do not fight him with emotion. You do not fight him with words. In this world, Ms. Watson, there is only one weapon that matters. I took the card. It was simple, cream-colored, with a single phone number embossed in black ink. No name. Evidence, Lawrence said. Paper trails, bank statements, timestamps. If he is moving money, there is a record. If he is forging signatures, there is a trace. You run a company. You know how to audit a supply chain. This is no different. Follow the materials. Find the leak. I don't have access to his corporate books, I said. You don't need his corporate books, Lawrence replied. You need to protect your father. Start there. Find out what has been signed. Find out where the money went. And do it quietly. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me one last time, his expression unreadable. I have seen men like your brother before, he said. They believe they are too bright to fail. They believe the rules are for other people, but gravity applies to everyone. He turned and began to walk toward the far stairs that led down to the street, bypassing the party entirely. Why help me? I called out to his retreating back. You don't know me. Lawrence paused. He didn't turn around. I admire a good foundation, he said. It insults me to see someone trying to build a castle on quicksand. Fix it, Chloe, before the whole house comes down. He disappeared into the shadows of the stairwell. I stood alone on the terrace. The wind had picked up, rattling the leaves of the ornamental bamboo I had selected for the perimeter planters. I looked down at the card in my hand. Then I looked through the glass. The party was reaching a crescendo. Waiters were passing out champagne for a toast. Ethan was at the center of the room, beaming, lifting his glass high. My mother was clapping. My father was clapping. They were cheering for the architect of their own destruction. For the first time all night, the humiliation I had felt earlier, the jokes about the dirt, the truck, the labor evaporated. It was replaced by something cold and hard. It was replaced by the steel that Lawrence had seen in me. The steel that held up bridges and reinforced retaining walls. My family thought I was simple. They thought I was slow because I worked with the earth. But they forgot one thing about people who work with the soil. We know how to dig. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and I saw the vulnerability in his posture. He wasn't just an old man. He was a victim, and he was being victimized by the one person he was programmed to trust. I slipped Lawrence's card into the pocket of my jumpsuit. I smoothed the fabric over my hip. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to go back inside, finish my glass of water, and smile at my brother. I was going to let him think he had won. And then, tomorrow morning, I was going to take apart his life, brick by brick, until I found the truth. I whispered to the glass, a promise in the language of my own resolve. Keep laughing, Ethan, keep drinking, because the gardener is coming for the weeds. I turned away from the view of the city I helped build, and I walked back toward the lion's den. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a sheep. I was walking in as the only person in the room who knew that the floor was about to give way. I pushed open the doors. The blast of warm air and music hit me, but I didn't flinch. I walked straight to the bar, ordered a club soda, and waited. The night was far from over, and the real work was just beginning. The Tuesday morning sun was hitting the windshield of my truck with a deceptive cheerfulness. I was parked in the lot of a coffee shop 3 blocks from my parents' condo, the engine idling, the air conditioner humming a low, steady note that usually calmed me down. Today, it sounded like a countdown. I had the phone in my hand for 10 minutes before I pressed the call button. I had to get the tone right. It had to be the breezy, casual voice of a daughter checking in on a Tuesday, not the voice of a woman who had spent the last 3 nights staring at the ceiling, replaying the words of an old banker on a terrace. I cleared my throat, put a smile on my face that nobody could see, and dialed. Hello? My father's voice sounded thin, older than I remembered, even though I had just seen him 2 nights ago. Hey, Dad, I said, keeping it light. It's Chloe, just driving between sites and wanted to say hi. How are you recovering from the big party? He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. Oh, you know me, sweetheart. Too much noise, too much fuss. I am still tired. Your mother, though she is still floating on a cloud. She has been reading the clippings about the merger all morning. That is great, I lied. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand. Hey, listen. The reason I called, I was looking at my own schedule for tax season. getting my paperwork in order for the business, and it reminded me, did you guys ever get that issue with the property tax assessment sorted out? I remember you mentioned it last Thanksgiving. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background, a game show. The tax assessment, he asked, sounding vague. I think so, yes. You think so? I pressed gently. Did you write the check, or did they deduct it automatically? I just want to make sure you didn't get hit with a late fee. The county is being brutal this year. Well, Dad said, hesitating, I don't actually write the checks anymore. Chloe, it was getting to be too much. All those passwords, the websites, my eyes aren't what they used to be. My heart hammered against my ribs. So, Mom handles it. No, he said. Your mother finds it stressful. Ethan handles it. He set up one of those, what do you call them, consolidated accounts. He said it is better for the portfolio. I see, I said. My voice remained steady. A miracle of acting. So, Ethan pays the bills. Does he send you the statements? Just so you can double check. Oh, I don't need to check, Dad said, his voice carrying a terrifying, childlike trust. Ethan says the statements are complicated. He gives us a summary every quarter. Besides, your mother said it is convenient this way. She said, Graham, let the boy handle it. He is the expert. So, we signed the authorization and let him do his job. You signed an authorization, I repeated. Power of attorney. Something like that, he said casually. Just for the accounts. To make it easier. That sounds efficient, Dad, I said. Well, I better get back to work. Love you. Love you too. Sweetheart, drive safe. I ended the call and let the phone drop into the cup holder. I sat there for a long time, staring at the brick wall of the coffee shop. My hands were freezing cold. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the blood draining out of my extremities. Mom said it is convenient. It wasn't just Ethan. My mother had served my father up on a platter. She had encouraged him to surrender his autonomy because it validated her narrative that Ethan was the capable one, the savior, the head of the family. I put the truck in gear. I had an appointment to keep. Tessa Monroe's office was on the 30th floor of a glass tower downtown. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. Tessa was a woman who spoke in paragraphs and never wasted a syllable. She sat behind a desk that looked like a landing strip, her fingers laced together. Elder financial abuse, she said. She didn't whisper it. She put the words on the table between us like a loaded gun. That is what we are discussing. Chloe, if your brother has access to their accounts and is using the funds for anything other than their direct benefit, it is a crime. It is not a family dispute. It is theft. He has authorization, I said, feeling the need to play devil's advocate, to test the strength of the cage my brother had built. My father told me they signed papers. Authorization is not ownership, Tessa corrected sharply. A power of attorney or signatory authority creates a fiduciary duty. He is legally obligated to act in their best interest. If he is using their retirement to plug holes in his own company or to fund a lifestyle he can't afford, he is breaching that duty. She slid a notepad across the desk. But suspicion isn't proof, she continued. And in cases like this, the parents are often the biggest obstacle. They will deny it. They will protect the abuser because he is their son. If we go to the police now, without hard evidence, your parents will likely side with him, and you will be cut out completely. We need a paper trail that is undeniable. I can't get his bank records, I said. I am just the sister. No, Tessa said, but you can get public records, and you can get a professional to look at the things you can't see. She wrote a name and a number on a piece of paper. Cal Rourke, she said. He is not a private eye who chases cheating husbands. He is a forensic accountant who used to work for the Treasury. He finds money that people don't want found. He is expensive, but you can afford him. I can afford him, I confirmed. Good, Tessa said. Chloe, listen to me. If you are right about this, your brother isn't just a bad businessman. He is a predator, and he is eating your inheritance and your parents' safety net. You need to stop thinking like a sister. You need to think like a prosecutor. I met Cal Rourke 2 hours later in a diner that smelled of grease and old coffee. He was a small man, nondescript, wearing a beige cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. He looked like a librarian, or perhaps a high school algebra teacher. He didn't make small talk. He opened a laptop, listened to my summary, and started typing. I can't hack bank accounts, Cal said, his voice soft and monotone. That is illegal. and I like my license, but I can run a comprehensive asset search. I can look for liens, judgments, UCC filings, and property transfers. If he is bleeding, there will be blood in the water. How long? I asked. Give me 48 hours for the deep dive, he said. But I can check the county recorder's office for the real estate right now. Give me the address. I gave him my parents' address, the condo they had moved into 5 years ago. They had bought it with cash from the sale of the big house. It was supposed to be free and clear. That was the whole point. No mortgage. Graham, my mother had said, total freedom. Cal tapped a few keys. He squinted at the screen. He clicked again. Then he stopped moving. You said they own it outright, Cal asked. Yes, I said. They paid $450,000 cash. I saw the check. Cal turned the laptop around so I could see the screen. There is a lien, he said. Recorded 4 months ago. It is a home equity line of credit. A second mortgage, essentially. I stared at the screen. The numbers swam before my eyes. How much? I asked. $250,000. Cal read. Issued by a private lender, not a major bank. High interest rate. And it is fully drawn down. $250,000. Gone. In 4 months. Who signed for it? I asked, my voice trembling. The owners, Cal said. Graham and Cynthia Watson. The deed is in their name, so they had to sign. He clicked on the document image, enlarging the signature page. There they were. Cynthia Watson, Graham Watson. I leaned in closer. The screen was grainy, but the signatures were clear enough. My mother's signature was perfect spiky, elegant, decisive, but my father's, I stared at the name, Graham Watson. That's not him, I whispered. Cal looked at me. It is notarized. Chloe, it looks like a match to the deed. No, I said, shaking my head. It looks like his signature, but it is not how he signs. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was 16 years old again. I was standing in the kitchen of our old house, holding a permission slip for a field trip I had forgotten to get signed. My dad was rushing out the door. Coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other. Dad, please, I had begged. He had put his coffee down. He had taken the pen, and he had signed. My father had a tell. He was left-handed, but he had been forced to write with his right hand in Catholic school when he was very young. He wrote with his right hand, but he did certain flourishes with a strange, heavy pressure, almost like he was fighting the pen, specifically the letter W. He always looped the top of the W inward. It was a fluid, counterclockwise motion. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen. The W on the mortgage document was sharp, the peaks were jagged, and the loop there was no loop. It was a clean, confident up-and-down stroke. It was a right-handed person trying to copy the look of the signature, but failing to copy the biomechanics of it. He forged it, I said. The realization settled over me like a sheet of ice. Ethan, he didn't just get them to sign. He signed for my father. If you can prove that, Cal said quietly, that is a felony. That is forgery and fraud. I can prove it, I said. I have old birthday cards. I have checks he wrote me for college tuition. I have 1,000 samples of his real signature. Okay, Cal said. He closed the laptop. This is a start. But if we are going to nail him, we need context. We need to know where that $250,000 went. I will trace the lender. I will find out where the funds were wired. I stood up. I felt strange. I expected to be crying. I expected to be hysterical. But I wasn't. I felt the way I felt when I walked onto a job site that was a disaster when the drainage was wrong. The grade was off, and the soil was unstable. I didn't cry about the mud. I got out my transit level. I got out my blueprints. I started measuring. Do it, I said to Cal. Find every cent. I walked out of the diner and back to my truck. I didn't go home. I drove to my office, the real one, the warehouse with the polished concrete floors and the drafting tables. I unlocked the door and turned on the overhead lights. The hum of the halogen bulbs was comforting. I went to the large whiteboard wall we used for project planning. I grabbed a black marker. I didn't draw a landscape. I drew a timeline. I started 3 years ago. Mark 1. Dad diagnosed with early-stage mild cognitive impairment. Kept secret by mom. Mark 2. Ethan buys a new Porsche. 6 months later. Mark 3. Ethan's company misses earnings targets. Mark 4. Parents sell the big house. Cash proceeds transferred to Ethan's management. I drew a line connecting the house sale to Ethan's promotion at work. Then I moved to the recent months. Mark 5. Ethan fires Dad's old accountant. Mark 6. The convenience conversation where Mom convinces Dad to give up control. Mark 7. The mortgage lien, $250,000 extracted. Mark 8. The merger party. I stepped back. The black lines on the white wall looked like a blueprint for a demolition. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a son in trouble making a mistake. It was systemic. Ethan had been grooming them. He had been slowly removing the safeguards, isolating the victims, and preparing the assets for extraction. And my mother was the site manager who opened the gates and let the bulldozer in, all because she liked the way the driver looked in a suit. I capped the marker. The snap echoed in the empty warehouse. I looked at my hands. They were steady. These were hands that knew how to prune dead branches. These were hands that knew how to dig out a stump that was rotting the rest of the garden. I wasn't Chloe, the little sister, anymore. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the project manager. And I had just identified a critical structural failure. "Okay, Ethan," I said to the empty room. "You want to play with the family money? Let's see how you do when I audit the books." I picked up my phone. I had calls to make. I had a foundation to inspect. And if I had to tear the whole house down to save the people inside, I would do it. I sat down at my drafting table, turned on the lamp, and began to work. No more tears. Just cold. Hard data. The dig had officially begun. The file Cal Rourke handed me 48 hours later was not thick. It was terrifyingly thin. It sat on the metal surface of my drafting table like a landmine waiting for a pressure trigger. "I didn't have to look deep," Cal said. He was standing by the window of my office, looking out at the rows of saplings we were prepping for the city park contract. He didn't look at me. He seemed almost embarrassed by what he had found, as if the sheer obviousness of the theft was an insult to his profession. Usually, guys like your brother try to be clever, shell companies, offshore accounts, layering, but Ethan is just grabbing handfuls of cash and hoping nobody counts the till. I opened the folder. The first page was a spreadsheet, color-coded in red and black. "Walk me through it," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. "The mortgage lien you found was just the opening salvo," Cal explained, turning from the window. "That $250,000 gone, wired out to a generic LLC in Delaware 3 days after the funds cleared. But here's the part that hurts. Look at the monthly withdrawals from the primary checking account." I looked. It was a list of transfers. $9,000, $9,000, $9,000. "He is keeping them under $10,000, Cal noted. "It is called structuring. It avoids triggering the automatic federal reporting requirement for cash transactions. He did this 17 times in the last 6 months. I did the math in my head. That was over $150,000. Liquid cash. My parents' emergency fund, their travel money, the money for their medical bills. "Where is it going?" I asked. "To cover margin calls," Cal said. "I cross-referenced the dates. Every time the market took a dip, money left your father's account. Ethan isn't investing their money. Chloe. He is using their money to pay off the bad bets he made with his own money. He is using your parents as an insurance policy against his own incompetence." He flipped the page. "And then there is the retirement account, the 401k rollover." I looked at the pie chart on the page. It should have been boring. At 73, my father's portfolio should have been bonds, treasury bills, and blue-chip dividend stocks. Safe, boring, secure. Instead, the chart was a jagged nightmare of red. "He liquidated the bond holdings 6 weeks ago," Cal said, his voice flat. "He moved the entire principal, nearly $400,000, into a high-risk cryptocurrency arbitrage fund and a series of volatile tech futures. If the market sneezes, your father is destitute." I felt bile rise in my throat. It wasn't just theft. It was gambling. He had taken the safety net my father had worked 40 years to weave and turned it into chips at a casino. "There is something else," Cal said. He pointed to a line item near the bottom of the expense report. "Look at the administrative fees." I squinted at the entry. "Consulting retainer $12,000. Crisis management firm $15,000. "Why is my father paying a crisis management firm?" I asked. "He isn't," Cal said. "Ethan is, but he is billing it to your parents' account as an advisory fee. Chloe, you don't hire a crisis PR firm unless you know a storm is coming, and you don't hire a criminal defense attorney, which is who this consultant actually is, unless you are expecting an indictment." I looked up at Cal. "He knows," I whispered. "He knows he's going down." "He is prepping for impact," Cal agreed. "And he is using your inheritance to pay for his parachute." I flipped to the last page of the report. It was a series of scanned authorizations, the permission slips that allowed this carnage to happen. I saw the forged signatures of my father again, the sharp, jagged double W that betrayed the fraud, but then my eyes drifted to the second signature line, Cynthia Watson. Her signature was fluid, confident, real. "Cal," I said, my voice trembling for the first time. "Did Mom sign these, or did he forge hers too?" Cal hesitated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I had a handwriting expert look at the samples. Your father's are definitely forged, but your mother's, they are authentic. Chloe, she signed the authorization for the line of credit. She signed the waiver for the risk profile change on the retirement account." I stared at the paper. She knew. Maybe she didn't understand the complex financial instruments. Maybe she didn't know he was losing the money. But she knew he was taking it. She knew he was mortgaging the house they had sworn never to mortgage again. She had signed her name next to a forgery of her husband's signature and said nothing. She had chosen her golden boy over her husband's survival. "If Ethan suspects you are on to him," Cal said, his tone urgent, interrupting my spiral of betrayal, "he will panic. He has access to the last remaining liquid assets, about $80,000 in a money market account. If he thinks the walls are closing in, he will drain it and run. He could be on a flight to the Caymans by tomorrow afternoon." "We have to freeze it," I said. "We have to stop him." "You can't," Cal said. "You have no legal standing. Only your father does. And your father doesn't know he's a victim yet." I grabbed the file and stood up. "Then I need to get standing." I didn't go to my parents. I went back to Tessa Monroe. When I laid Cal's report on her desk, she didn't look shocked. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the evidence of the structuring and the forgery. "This is enough," Tessa said. "It is enough for a temporary restraining order on the accounts, and it is certainly enough for a guardianship petition. Do it," I said. "File it today. If I file this in civil court," Tessa warned, "it becomes public record. Ethan will get a notification immediately. He will know you are coming for him. He might destroy evidence. He might coerce your father into signing a video affidavit saying he agreed to everything. It gets messy, Chloe, and it warns him." "So what is the alternative?" I asked. "I can't let him spend another dime." "We need to go higher," Tessa said. "We don't just sue him, we hand him over." She reached for her phone. "I have a contact. She's with the Financial Crimes Division. If there is already smoke around Ethan's company, as your friend on the terrace suggested, then the feds are already looking. They just need a map to find the bodies." "The police?" I asked. "Better," Tessa said. "Special Agent Nadia Crane. She eats guys like Ethan for breakfast." We met Nadia Crane in a parked sedan overlooking the industrial waterfront, 3 miles from the city center. It was a cliché, but Nadia explained that she couldn't be seen walking into my landscape architecture office, and I certainly couldn't be seen walking into the federal building. Nadia was younger than I expected. Maybe my age, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bob cut. She wore a windbreaker over a suit. She didn't shake my hand. She just took the file Tessa had prepared. She read in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound was the distant horn of a tugboat. "We have been watching Watson Capital for 6 months," Nadia said finally, not looking up from the papers. "We knew they were cooking the books on the corporate side, inflating assets, hiding liabilities, the usual Ponzi dynamics. But we couldn't figure out how he was maintaining liquidity. We couldn't figure out where the cash was coming from to pay the lease on that fancy office." She tapped the file with her index finger. "This is it," she said. "He is cannibalizing his family to keep the lights on." "Can you arrest him?" I asked. "Right now?" Nadia closed the file and looked at me. Her eyes were sympathetic but hard. I could pick him up for structuring and wire fraud based on this, but if I arrest him today, he makes bail in 2 hours. He hires a shark lawyer who argues that this was all a family misunderstanding, that his father gave verbal consent, that the forgery is just messy paperwork done for an invalid parent. It becomes a he said, she said. "He stole $250,000, I said, my voice rising. "I know," Nadia said. "But to put him away for a long time to make sure he doesn't just walk away with a slap on the wrist and your dad's money hidden in a crypto wallet, we need him to hang himself. We need to catch him in the act of trying to flee or trying to destroy evidence. We need the panic move." "He is already panicking," I said. "He is paying crisis consultants." "Good," Nadia said. "That means he is close to the edge. We need to push him over." She handed the file back to me. "Keep acting normal," she instructed. "Do not confront him. Do not tell your parents. If you tell your mother, she will tip him off. I guarantee it. I know, I said bitterly. She signed the papers. We are going to put a flag on the accounts, Nadia said. Silent monitoring. The bank won't notify him. But we will see every penny that moves. The moment he tries to make the final withdrawal, the getaway money, we will know. And that is when we take him. But it has to be the right time and the right place. We want him to do it when he feels safe. The merger dinner, I realized. Next week, he is hosting a dinner for the partners to finalize the deal, Nadia nodded. If the deal is falling apart, that is when he will make his move. He will try to secure his exit funds before the partners walk away. Be there, be the sister, and wait for my signal. I drove home in a daze. The weight of the secret was heavier than any pallet of stone I had ever lifted. I had to pretend to love the brother who was robbing us. I had to pretend to respect the mother who was letting him do it. I spent the next 2 days working myself into exhaustion at the job site. I dug trenches until my muscles screamed. I laid pavers until my hands were raw. I needed the physical pain to distract me from the emotional rot destroying my family. It was Tuesday night, midnight. I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by blueprints for a new city plaza project, trying to focus on drainage gradients. My phone buzzed on the floor next to me. The screen lit up. Ethan. I stared at it. The vibration rattled against the hardwood floor like an angry insect. I took a deep breath. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked it up. Hello. My voice was thick with sleep. Feigned, but convincing. Chloe. His voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the smooth baritone voice of the CEO. It was high, tight, and fast. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. Ethan, I asked, sitting up. What time is it? Is everything okay? Yeah, everything is fine, he said, the words tumbling over each other. Listen, I am in a bit of a jam. Temporary cash flow thing. The bank's systems are down for maintenance and I need to clear a vendor payment by morning or it holds up the merger. He was lying. I knew the bank's schedule. I knew vendor terms. Okay, I said slowly. I need to borrow some cash, he said. Just for 24 hours. I will wire it back with interest on Thursday. Seriously? Double the amount. How much, Ethan? There was a silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing. I could hear ice clinking in a glass. He was drinking again. 75,000, he said. I almost dropped the phone. $75,000. That was almost exactly the amount left in my father's money market account. The last scrap of flesh on the bone. He must have tried to access it and found it flagged or frozen. Or maybe he just couldn't forge the signature fast enough. Ethan, I said, that is a lot of money. I don't keep that kind of cash. You have the business accounts, he snapped, his facade cracking instantly. Don't lie to me. Chloe, I know you have overhead. I know you have payroll. You have cash sitting there. Just write me a check, or wire it. I will send you the routing number. I can't just drain the company account, I said. I have to pay my crew. Screw your crew, he shouted. This is my life. Chloe. This merger is everything. If I don't pay this, look. Just help me, okay? For once in your life, be useful. Dad would want you to help me. The manipulation was so clumsy, so desperate. It was almost pitiable. Dad, I repeated. Does Dad know you are asking me? Don't bring him into this, Ethan hissed. He is old. He doesn't need the stress. This is between us. Family helping family. 75,000, I said again, letting the number hang in the air. I will make you a partner, he offered, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. When the merger closes, I will give you shares. You can stop playing in the dirt. Just get me the money. I looked at the timeline I had drawn on my whiteboard. I looked at the dark screen of my laptop where Cal's report was saved. I need to check my balances, I said calmly. I need to see if I can move things around. Do it, he said. Do it now. And Chloe. Yeah. Don't ask any questions, he said. Just send the money. If you tell anyone, if you tell Mom, I asked, it will kill the deal. You understand. Don't ask. I understand, I said. He hung up. I sat there in the silence of my living room. He was trying to take the money I had earned with my own sweat to replace the money he had stolen from our father. I didn't transfer the money. Instead, I sent a text message to a number saved in my phone as NC. He just asked for 75,000. He is desperate. The well is dry. A moment later, a reply came back. Hold the line. See you at dinner. I put the phone down. My brother thought he was calling a lifeline. He didn't realize he had just confirmed his own death sentence. The trap was no longer just set. The door had just slammed shut. I sent the flowers first. They were white orchids, elegant, expensive, and utterly devoid of personality. They were exactly the kind of thing Sloane would appreciate because they photographed well and signaled submission. I included a card that read, "To a successful future. So sorry for the confusion. Let's celebrate properly." It was the opening move of a performance that had to be flawless. Then, I made the call to my mother. "Mom," I said, pitching my voice into that soft, apologetic register she had always associated with obedience. "I was thinking about the other night. I was tired, and I think I might have been a little out of place. I want to make it up to you and Ethan. I want to host a dinner." On the other end of the line, I could practically hear the tension leaving Cynthia Watson's shoulders. It was a physical release. She let out a long breath, the sound of a woman who believes she has finally wrestled a difficult pet into its cage. "Oh, Chloe," she sighed. "I am so relieved to hear you say that. We were worried. You know, Ethan was very upset. He thought you were well. Jealous. It is ugly when family is jealous." "I know," I said. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the timeline on my wall, my hand gripping the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "I am not jealous. I just want to be supportive. I want to celebrate the merger properly. My treat." "Well," she said, her voice brightening, "that is very mature of you, dear. Finally, you know, Ethan has been under so much pressure. A nice family dinner is exactly what we need. Just us. But I knew it wouldn't be just us." 2 hours later, Ethan texted me. The bait had been taken, chewed, and swallowed. "Mom says you're paying." "Great. I'm inviting the managing partners from the acquisition firm. Need to keep the momentum going. Make sure the place is high-end. No dive bars." I smiled at the screen. It was perfect. He couldn't resist. He needed an audience. He needed to parade his victory in front of the people who held the purse strings. And he needed his reformed little sister there to prove that his home life was as stable as his balance sheet. He was bringing the witnesses to his own execution. I texted back, "Understood." I booked the Gilded Atrium, private room, 7 o'clock Thursday. I didn't choose the Gilded Atrium because the food was good, though it was excellent. I chose it because 3 years ago, my firm had designed and installed their interior living wall and the automated irrigation system for their private event spaces. I knew the layout, I knew the acoustics, and more importantly, under the terms of our maintenance contract, I still had administrative access to the localized network that controlled the environment, including the security feed in the private dining room. I wasn't just inviting them to dinner, I was inviting them into a recording booth. Wednesday was a blur of calculated movements. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, moving through the motions while my mind was constantly 3 steps ahead. I met Nadia Crane in a parking garage this time. It seemed fitting. We were dealing with the dirty underbelly of high finance. We belonged in the concrete shadows. "The Gilded Atrium," Nadia said, nodding as she leaned against her sedan. "Good choice. 1 entrance to the private room, 1 exit through the service corridor, easy containment." "How is this going to go down?" I asked. "I don't want a SWAT team kicking in the door while my father is eating soup. Nadia, he is fragile." "We are not amateurs," Nadia said. "We are going to wait until the meal is underway. I have a team of 2 agents. We will come to the door. We will ask Mr. Watson to step outside for a conversation. If he comes quietly, nobody sees cuffs until he is in the car. If he makes a scene well, that is on him. He will make a scene," I predicted. "He is going to try to bluster his way out of it. He is going to try to use the partners as shields." "Let him," Nadia said grimly. "The partners are already cooperating witnesses. Chloe, they know we are coming. They are just there to ensure he doesn't run before we get there." I felt a chill. The men Ethan was trying to impress were actually his jailers. "One more thing," I said. "I need to make sure my father is insulated. If the government seizes Ethan's assets, they might freeze everything associated with him. That includes the accounts he manages for my parents." "It is a possibility," Nadia admitted. "Asset forfeiture is a blunt instrument. I am taking care of it," I said. That afternoon, I walked into the bank that held the lien on my parents' condo. The private lender was a predatory outfit located in a strip mall, the kind of place that smells of desperation and cheap cologne. I sat down across from a loan officer who looked at my work boots with disdain. "I am here to satisfy the lien on the Watson property," I said. "You want to make a payment?" he asked, popping his gum. "No," I said. "I want to pay the principal, the interest, and the early termination fee. Today." I slid a cashier's check across the desk. It was for $262,000. It was a massive hit to my personal liquidity. It was money I had earmarked for a new fleet of excavators. It was 3 years of savings. But as I watched the loan officer's eyes widen, I felt a strange sense of power. My family thought I dug in the dirt for pennies. They had no idea that the dirt paid better than their illusions. "I want the release of lien recorded immediately," I said. "And I want the original note marked paid in full and given to me." "I have to get the manager," the man stammered. "Get him," I said. "I have time." By 4 o'clock, I had the paperwork. My parents' home was safe. Ethan couldn't use it as collateral, and the government couldn't seize it as proceeds of crime because I had paid it off with clean, verified money from my business. I also set up a trust. An irrevocable trust for the care of Graham Watson, funded with another $50,000 from my account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to buy groceries and pay utilities for 2 years if everything else went to zero. I was rebuilding the foundation of their lives while they were busy mocking mine. I was driving back to my apartment when my phone rang. It was Cal. "We have a problem," Cal said. He didn't say hello. "What is it?" I asked, putting him on speaker. "Did he move the money?" "He moved some of it," Cal said. "But he didn't move it to an offshore account. He moved it to a domestic LLC. I did a deep dive on the ownership structure. I thought it was just a shell, but I found a secondary filing in Nevada. And the managing member isn't Ethan," Cal said. "It is Sloan." I slammed on my brakes at a red light, the tires screeching slightly. "Sloan?" I repeated. "His wife, the one who thinks a spreadsheet is a type of tablecloth. She is not as dumb as she acts. Chloe," Cal said, "the LLC was formed 6 months ago, right around the time the first fraudulent transfers started. The account associated with it has received $40,000 in consulting fees from Ethan's firm. And here's the kicker, the signature on the bank account opening documents. It is hers. Wet ink. She knows." I stared at the red traffic light. It blurred into a bloody streak in my vision. Sloan. I had assumed she was just a beneficiary of his greed, a spoiled woman enjoying the ride, but she wasn't a passenger. She was the co-pilot. She knew he was stealing. She knew he was defrauding investors. And she had set up her own little lifeboat to catch the overflow. She was mocking my clothes, mocking my job, all while sitting on a pile of cash stolen from my father's retirement. "Thank you, Cal," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Does this change the plan?" Cal asked. "No," I said. "It expands the target list." I hung up. I went home and stood in front of my closet. I had to dress for dinner. For years. I had dressed to be invisible. I wore grays and browns. I wore things that allowed me to fade into the background so I wouldn't offend their sensibilities. Not tonight. I reached to the back of the closet, past the flannel shirts and the work pants. I pulled out a dress I had bought in Milan 3 years ago, during a research trip for a Renaissance garden restoration project. It was black, not the modest, funeral black I usually wore. This was a structural black. It was architectural. It had a sharp, asymmetrical neckline and a fit that was unforgiving. It looked like armor made of silk. I pulled it on. It fit perfectly. I sat on the edge of my bed and picked up my shoes. Stilettos, 4 inches of steel and leather. I hadn't worn them in years because they weren't practical. But tonight wasn't about practicality. It was about height. I wanted to be tall. I wanted to look Sloan in the eye when I tore her world apart. I did my makeup. I didn't try to soften my features. I accentuated them. Sharp eyeliner, dark red lips. I looked like a stranger. I looked like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I picked up the file folder, the one containing Cal's report, the timeline, the forged signatures, and the new documents proving Sloan's complicity. I placed it into a slim black leather portfolio. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back at me didn't look like a gardener. She didn't look like a disappointment. She looked dangerous. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "We are all here. The partners are lovely. Please try to be on time. And please, Chloe, try to look presentable. No work boots." I laughed. A single, harsh sound in the empty apartment. "Don't worry, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "I am going to be very presentable." I looked at the portfolio in my hand. Inside was the end of my brother's career, the end of my sister-in-law's social standing, and the end of my parents' delusions. I was about to walk into a room and detonate a bomb that would destroy my family as we knew it. But it wasn't a bomb I had built. They had built it. Brick by stolen brick. I was just the one bringing the match. "They want me to be proper," I said. checking the clasp on the portfolio. They want the good daughter, the one who cleans up the mess. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. Fine. Tonight, I will be proper. I will be the most proper executioner they have ever seen. I walked to the elevator, the click of my heels on the floor echoing like gunshots. The masking was over. The investigation was done. Now, there was only the dinner, and I was starving. The private dining room at the Gilded Atrium was a masterpiece of acoustic isolation and mood lighting. The walls were upholstered in crushed velvet that absorbed sound, making every conversation feel intimate and conspiratorial. A crystal chandelier hung above the circular table, casting a warm, flattering glow on the 7 people seated beneath it. I was the 8th. When I walked through the mahogany doors, the conversation stopped. It didn't taper off. It was severed. I saw the reaction ripple through them like a shockwave. My mother, Cynthia, dropped her fork. Her eyes widened, scanning the black architectural dress, the stilettos, the dark lipstick. She looked as though she had walked into her kitchen and found a panther sitting on the counter. She didn't know how to process a version of her daughter that wasn't covered in dust. Sloane's reaction was different. She narrowed her eyes. Her hand went instinctively to her throat, touching her diamond necklace as if checking to see if my presence somehow diminished its carat weight. She recognized the dress. She knew exactly what a piece like that cost, and the calculation was malfunctioning in her brain. Ethan just stared. He looked haggard, despite the expensive facial he had likely gotten that morning. There were dark circles under his eyes that concealer couldn't hide. He looked at me, then at the empty chair, then back at me. "Chloe," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You look different." "I cleaned up," I said, my voice smooth and low. "You wanted tonight to be special. Ethan, I thought I would dress for the occasion." I walked to the empty chair between my father and Kyle. I sat down, placing the black leather portfolio on the table next to my plate. I didn't hide it. I let it sit there, a silent obelisk in the middle of the crystal and silver. "Well," Kyle said, breaking the silence with a nervous laugh. He was wearing a tuxedo that was a size too small, trying desperately to look like he belonged with the private equity crowd. "I have to say, Chloe, I didn't know you owned anything that didn't come from a hardware store. You clean up nice, really nice." "Thank you, Kyle," I said, unfolding my napkin. "It is just a shame," Kyle continued, leaning in and addressing the 2 men across the table, the merger partners. "I was telling Ethan earlier, if Chloe had applied this kind of effort to a real career, instead of playing in the mud, she could have been a contender. She has the brain for it. Somewhere in there, she just lacks the discipline." He smiled at me, a benevolent teacher correcting a slow student. "It is never too late to learn, right?" Kyle added, winking at the partners. The 2 partners, Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance, offered polite, tight-lipped smiles. They were serious men in gray suits, looking at their watches, clearly wondering why they were listening to a man like Kyle Denton. "Actually," Ethan interrupted, sensing the room needed his charisma. He stood up, tapping his spoon against his champagne glass. The sound was sharp and piercing. "I think a toast is in order." Everyone shifted. My father, Graham, looked up from his soup with a start. He looked frail tonight, his tuxedo hanging loosely on his frame. My mother reached over and patted his hand, a gesture that looked affectionate but was actually a restraint. "To vision," Ethan proclaimed, raising his glass high. His hand was trembling. Just a fraction. But the champagne rippled. "Tonight is about the future. It is about taking something good and making it extraordinary. We are on the verge of a partnership that will redefine the sector." He looked at Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance. "Gentlemen, you are not just buying a company. You are buying a legacy. You are buying a brain trust." Then, he turned his eyes to me. The malice in them was naked. He needed to put me down to lift himself up. It was his oldest reflex. "My sister Chloe here," he said, gesturing with his glass, "reminds me every day why I do what I do. She works with her hands. She builds things out of dirt and stone, and there is a nobility in that, I suppose. But tonight celebrates the other kind of work, the work of the mind, the work that moves markets, not just mulch. It proves that while hands can build a garden, only a vision can build an empire." Sloane giggled. It was a cruel, tinkling sound. "Oh, Ethan, you are so poetic." "To the mind," Ethan finished, looking straight at me. "May it always rule over the labor." "To the mind," Kyle echoed enthusiastically. My mother raised her glass. "To the mind." My father lifted his glass because everyone else did. Though he looked confused by the sentiment, I did not pick up my glass. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, looking directly at Ethan. I didn't frown. I didn't look hurt. I didn't look down at my lap in shame, which was the reaction he was begging for. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert watching a building collapse exactly the way she had planned. The silence stretched. Ethan lowered his glass, waiting for me to speak, to defend myself, to cause a scene he could dismiss as hysteria. I said nothing. The air in the room grew heavy. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. Mr. Vance shifted in his chair. Ethan's smile began to falter. He twitched. My silence was denying him the friction he needed to maintain his momentum. "Well," Ethan said, sitting down abruptly. "Let's eat." The waiters moved in, pouring wine, serving appetizers. The conversation was stilted. Ethan tried to talk about synergy and market cap, but his voice was too loud, too desperate. I ate a piece of bread, chewing slowly. I checked my watch. 7:30, right on time. The heavy mahogany doors to the private room opened. It wasn't a waiter. Lawrence Halden stepped into the room. He was wearing a black tuxedo that made the other men in the room look like they were wearing costumes. He held his cane in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance. Ethan stood up, angry. "Excuse me. This is a private function. You can't just—" "Lawrence," Mr. Sterling gasped. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Mr. Vance stood up too, his face draining of color. "Mr. Halden, I didn't know you were involved in this." Ethan froze. He looked from the partners to the old man, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had no idea who Lawrence was, but he recognized the scent of power. "I am not involved," Lawrence said. His voice was calm, gravelly, and commanded absolute silence. "That is the problem." He walked to the table. He moved slowly, emphasizing his age and his authority. He stopped behind my chair, placing a hand on the back of it, acknowledging me without looking at me. "Who is this?" my mother whispered, clutching her pearls. "Ethan, who is this man?" "I am an observer, Mrs. Watson," Lawrence said, answering her without turning his head. "And tonight, I am a warning." He tossed the manila envelope onto the center of the table. It landed on top of the floral arrangement, crushing one of the white lilies. "Before you sign anything, gentlemen," Lawrence said to the partners, "and before you finish your sea bass, I suggest you look at page 4. Ethan lunged for the envelope. "This is unauthorized. This is proprietary information. You have no right." "Sit down, Ethan," I said. It was the first time I had spoken since the toast. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. Ethan looked at me, shocked. "What?" "I said sit down," I repeated. I picked up the black portfolio from beside my plate. I unzipped it. The sound of the zipper was the loudest thing in the room. Mr. Sterling ignored Ethan. He reached out and took the envelope Lawrence had thrown. He opened it. He pulled out the documents. "Page 4, Lawrence advised softly. Mr. Sterling turned the pages. Mr. Vance leaned over his shoulder. I watched their faces. I saw the confusion turn to skepticism, and then to horror. This can't be right," Mr. Sterling muttered. "The revenue recognition for the third quarter. It is listed here as contingent." "Keep reading," Lawrence said. "Look at the liabilities section. Specifically, the loans collateralized by personal family assets." Ethan was sweating now, profusely. "That is a draft," he yelled. "That is an old model. Who gave you that, Chloe? Did you give him that?" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is crazy. She is just a gardener. She doesn't understand the numbers." "I understand theft," I said. I slid a piece of paper from my portfolio and pushed it across the table toward my father. "Dad," I said gently, "look at this." Graham Watson looked at me, his eyes wide and frightened. He looked at the paper. It was the copy of the forged mortgage authorization. "That is your name, Dad," I said. "But is that your signature?" Dad squinted. He put on his reading glasses with trembling hands. He looked at the jagged W. He looked at the lack of the loop. "No," he whispered. "No, I don't write like that." "Graham, don't be silly," my mother snapped, reaching for the paper. "Of course you signed it. You forget things." "He didn't sign it, Mom," I said, looking at her. "You did. You signed your name next to a forgery. You let Ethan mortgage the condo, the one that was supposed to be safe. My mother stopped. Her face went pale. She looked at Ethan. You said it was just paperwork. You said it was a formality for the bank. It was, Ethan screamed. It is just bridge financing. It gets paid back next week, as soon as the deal closes. The deal is not closing, Mr. Sterling said. His voice was ice cold. He dropped the papers onto the table as if they were contaminated. We were told your liquidity was based on operational cash flow. This shows you are funding operations with personal debt and structured withdrawals from a senior citizen's retirement fund. Mr. Sterling looked at Ethan with pure disgust. You cooked the books, Watson, and you used your parents as kindling. No, Ethan shouted. You don't understand. The potential is huge. We just need time. You are out of time, Lawrence said. Sloane stood up. She looked terrified. She grabbed her purse. I have to go to the restroom. Sit down. Sloane, I said. I pulled another document from my portfolio. Nevada, I said. The shell company. The one receiving the $40,000 in consulting fees while my father's account was being drained. Sloane froze. I have the bank signature card. Sloane, I said. It has your name on it. You aren't just a bystander. You are the getaway driver. Sloane sank back into her chair. She looked at Ethan with hatred. You said it was safe. You said nobody could trace it. Shut up, Ethan roared at her. Shut up. Kyle Denton was staring at me. His mouth was open. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the realization that he was sitting at a table with a sinking ship and I was the iceberg. Chloe, Kyle stammered. I had no idea. I was just trying to facilitate. Be quiet, Kyle, I said without looking at him. You are irrelevant. Ethan was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at the partners, then at Lawrence, then at me. You did this, he hissed. You jealous, petty little failure. You ruined everything because you couldn't stand to see me win. I didn't ruin anything, I said. I just turned on the lights. Ethan reached into his pocket. His phone was buzzing. It had been buzzing for 10 seconds, vibrating against the table. He looked at it. He didn't want to answer it, but the room was silent, and the buzzing was like a drill in his skull. He picked it up. What? He barked into the phone. We all watched him. His face changed. The anger drained away, leaving behind a gray, hollow mask of terror. His eyes darted to the service exit, then to the main doors. Who? He whispered. He listened for another second. Then the phone slipped from his fingers. It hit the tablecloth with a muffled thud. He looked at me. His eyes were pleading now. The arrogance was dead. Who was that? My mother asked, her voice trembling. Ethan. Who was that? Ethan swallowed. He couldn't speak. He looked like a man who had just heard the sound of the gallows trapdoor opening. It was the neighbor, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. From the house, next door. What did they say? I asked. Ethan looked at the partners, who were already packing up their briefcases. He looked at Sloane, who was crying silently. He looked at my father, who was staring at the forged signature in confusion. He said there are cars in the driveway, Ethan said. Black cars, and people with windbreakers. He looked at me, and a single tear leaked out of his eye. He said they are at the house. Chloe, they are looking for me. I picked up my glass of water. I took a slow sip. Then you better finish your drink, Ethan, I said. I don't think they like to wait. The sound of Ethan's phone hitting the tablecloth was the only noise in the room for 3 heartbeats. Then, the panic set in. It wasn't the frantic, screaming panic of a movie scene. It was the desperate, drowning panic of a man trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. Ethan let out a laugh. It was a wet, jagged sound that had no mirth in it. Okay, Ethan said, standing up and wiping his palms on his tuxedo pants. Okay, everyone, let's just take a breath. This is clearly a misunderstanding. A clerical error. You know how these back office guys are. They mix up the legacy accounts with the operational funds. It happens. It is a glitch in the software. He looked at Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance, his eyes wide and pleading, begging them to accept the lie. I can call my CFO right now, Ethan stammered. He will explain the coding error. The numbers you are looking at, they are from a draft model, a stress test. They are not real. Mr. Sterling did not look up. He was still staring at the document Lawrence had thrown on the table. He flipped a page, his expression hardening from confusion to professional disgust. This is not a stress test. Mr. Watson, Sterling said, these are wire transfers. These are completed transactions with federal reference numbers. You cannot code a wire transfer by accident 17 times. It is a complex structure, Ethan argued, his voice rising in pitch. It is a liquidity bridge. It is standard practice. Standard practice. Lawrence Halden's voice cut through the air like a guillotine blade. He was still standing behind my chair, his hands resting on his cane. I have spent 40 years in this city. I have seen every trick, every shell game, and every excuse, and I have seen this exact speech before. Lawrence leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes locking onto Ethan. I have seen it exactly 10 minutes before the wrists get cuffed. The color drained from Ethan's face so completely, he looked like he had been dusted with flour. Before Ethan could respond, the service door to the private room opened. It opened slowly, deliberately. 2 people walked in. I recognized Nadia Crane instantly. She wasn't wearing the windbreaker she had worn in the parking garage. She was wearing a sharp navy suit. The man with her was taller, broader, and wore the distinct, heavy expression of federal law enforcement. They didn't look like dinner guests. They looked like consequences. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Sloane let out a small, strangled whimper and covered her mouth with her hand. Nadia walked around the table. She didn't rush. She stopped 3 feet from where Ethan was standing. Ethan Watson, Nadia asked. Her voice was polite, the kind of polite that is terrifying because it is absolute. Who are you? Ethan demanded, though his voice shook. This is a private dinner. You are trespassing. Nadia reached into her jacket pocket. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a badge wallet and flipped it open. The gold shield caught the light of the chandelier. Special Agent Crane, Financial Crimes Division, she said. And this is Agent Miller. We would like you to step outside with us, Mr. Watson. We have some questions regarding the filing of your recent SEC disclosures and some irregularities in your personal banking activities. Ethan looked at the badge. He looked at the partners. He looked at the door. Then, he looked at me. The fear in his eyes transmuted instantly into rage. It was a chemical reaction, volatile and ugly. He couldn't attack the federal agents. He couldn't attack the investors, so he turned on the only person he had ever felt safe attacking. You, Ethan hissed. He pointed a finger at me, thrusting it across the table. You did this, he screamed. You jealous, miserable little bitch, you called them. You set this up. Ethan, my father gasped, shocked out of his confusion. Shut up, Dad, Ethan yelled, not even looking at him. He kept his eyes fixed on me. She has always been like this. She is jealous because I am the one who made it. She plays in the dirt while I build an empire, and she couldn't stand it. She wants to ruin me. She wants to drag us all down into the mud with her because she is a failure. He turned to Mr. Sterling, grabbing the man's shoulder. She is mentally unstable, Ethan pleaded. She forged these documents. She is trying to sabotage the merger because I wouldn't give her a loan. It is a family dispute. That is all this is. I did not scream back. I did not stand up. I did not cry. I simply reached into my black portfolio and pulled out the thickest file, the one Cal had prepared, the one titled Timeline of Asset Misappropriation. I placed it gently on the spinning center of the table, the Lazy Susan, and gave it a small push. The file rotated slowly. It passed the salmon. It passed the wine. It stopped directly in front of Agent Crane. I think you will find this helpful. Agent, I said. My voice was calm, clear, and steady. It contains the notarized affidavits from the handwriting expert regarding my father's signature. It also contains the bank records linking the Delaware Shell Company to the personal accounts of Ethan and Sloane Watson. Sloane, Ethan gasped. He spun around to look at his wife. Sloane was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I didn't know it was illegal. He told me to sign it. You liar, Ethan shouted. You spent the money, you bought the car, you booked the trip to the Maldives. Mr. Watson, Nadia said, her voice dropping an octave. Lower your voice, now. It is a lie, Ethan shouted, backing away toward the window, as if he could escape through the glass. My parents agreed to everything. It was a family loan. My mother approved it. He looked frantically at Cynthia. Mom, he begged. Tell them you said it was okay. Tell them we were just moving money around to protect the estate. My mother was sitting rigid in her chair. Her face was a mask of horror. She looked at Ethan, her golden boy, the son of her universe, who was currently melting down in front of the most important people in his industry. She looked at the agents, She looked at the handcuffs that Agent Miller had just unclipped from his belt. And then, Cynthia Watson did what she always did. She tried to smooth things over. She tried to rewrite reality to fit her picture. "It was for the family," my mother stammered, standing up. Her hands were fluttering like nervous birds. "Officers, please, there is no need for this. We discussed it. I told Ethan he could manage the accounts. I told him to do whatever was necessary to get the business through the rough patch." The room went dead silent. I looked at my mother. She had just walked into the trap. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her babble. "Are you saying you knew?" "I knew he was borrowing some liquidity," she cried, looking at me with desperation. "He said he would pay it back next week." "He is your brother." "Chloe, we help family." "And the mortgage?" I asked. "The $250,000 lien on the condo. Did you know about that too?" My mother froze. She looked at my father. She faltered. "I signed the paper. Ethan said Dad wouldn't understand. He said it would just worry him. So I signed my name, and Ethan took care of the rest." "Took care of the rest," I repeated. "You mean he forged Dad's signature?" "He didn't mean any harm," my mother shrieked. "He needed the money. He's going to be a CEO." I turned to my father. Graham Watson was sitting very still. He was looking at his wife of 40 years. He was looking at the woman who had managed his life, who had told him he was too old, too slow, too confused to handle his own money. He realized now that it wasn't his mind that was failing. It was his trust that had been weaponized. He picked up the document I had slid to him earlier. The forgery. "You knew," Dad whispered. His voice was cracked, like dry leaves. "Cynthia, you knew he put a debt on our home and you didn't tell me." "Graham, please," Mom said, reaching for him. "It was just temporary." Dad pulled his hand away. He looked at her with a stranger's eyes. "You let him steal from me," Dad said. He stood up. He was shaking, but he stood tall. "You let him steal 40 years of my work because you wanted to brag about his job title." "Dad," Ethan started. "Don't," Dad said. He didn't shout. He just held up a hand. "Don't speak to me." Ethan looked like he had been slapped. Agent Miller stepped forward. "Ethan Watson, I am going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," Ethan whispered. "No, I can't. The merger." He looked at the partners. Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance were standing by the door, watching with the cold detachment of undertakers. "The merger is dead, Ethan," Mr. Sterling said. "And frankly, looking at this file, your company is dead too." Ethan's knees seemed to give way. Agent Miller caught him by the arm, spinning him around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was loud. Click, click. It was the sound of a billion-dollar dream snapping shut. Ethan was hyperventilating now. "Sloan, call the lawyer, call Kaplan." Sloan was sobbing into her napkin. She didn't look up. She knew that the agents would be coming for her next. She was calculating her own survival, and Ethan was no longer part of the equation. Then, there was a movement to my right. Kyle Denton cleared his throat. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He smoothed his tuxedo jacket, his face pale and sweaty. He looked at Ethan in handcuffs. Then he looked at the partners. And finally, he looked at me. He realized, with the clarity of a parasite seeking a new host, that he had bet on the wrong horse. He realized that the gardener was the one sitting with the federal agents, the one who had just exposed a massive fraud, the one who had paid off the house. "Chloe," Kyle said. His voice was trembling, trying for charm but landing on pathetic. "I want you to know. I had no idea. I am shocked. Truly." He took a step toward me. I think maybe you and I should talk," Kyle said, forcing a smile. "Privately, I mean. Obviously. I have some capital to deploy. And if you are expanding your business, you clearly have a sharp head for this. I always said that. Remember?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me to get a desk job 2 hours ago, the man who had mocked my work boots, the man who had left me because I wasn't going places. "Kyle," I said. "Yes," he asked, hopeful. "You aren't an investor," I said. "You are a tourist, and you are trespassing in a crime scene." I turned to Lawrence. "Mr. Halden, would you mind asking the staff to remove Mr. Denton? I believe he has a warehouse job to apply for." Lawrence smiled, a genuine smile this time. "With pleasure." Kyle's mouth dropped open. He looked around the room, realized he had 0 allies. and scurried out the door past the agents like a frightened rat. Agent Miller began to march Ethan toward the door. Ethan stumbled. He looked wrecked. His hair was messy. His tie was crooked, and he was crying openly now. As they reached the doorway, Ethan dug his heels in. He stopped. He twisted his head around to look at me. "Chloe," he choked out. The room went silent again. "Chloe, please," Ethan begged. Tears ran down his face, mixing with the sweat. "Please, you can stop this. You can tell them it was a mistake. You can tell Dad to drop the charges. I am your brother. I am your big brother." He looked at me with eyes that were terrified, desperate, and pathetic. "Don't let them take me," he sobbed. "I will lose everything. Please, just help me this one time. I promise I will pay it back. Just help me." I looked at him. I remembered the 12-year-old boy who beat up the bully for me, but then I remembered the 39-year-old man who called me a failure in front of 200 people. I remembered the man who stole from our father. I remembered the man who forged a signature and called it love. I looked at my mother, who was weeping into her hands. I looked at my father, who was staring at the wall. Broken. I stood up. I walked over to Ethan. I stood inches from his face. "You asked for help on Tuesday," I said softly. "Yes," Ethan cried, hope flaring in his eyes. "Yes, and I'm sorry," I yelled. "I was stressed. Please, Chloe." "You asked me for money," I continued. "You asked me to cover your theft, and you told me something very specific." "Ethan?" "What?" he gasped. "What did I say?" "You told me not to ask any questions," I said. I leaned in closer. "So I didn't ask questions," I whispered. "I found answers." "Chloe, please," he wailed. "Help me." I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't tremble. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking up at him. I was looking down. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final as a tombstone. Ethan's face collapsed. He realized, finally, that the sister he had mocked was the one who had just signed his warrant. "Get him out of here," Nadia ordered. Agent Miller shoved Ethan forward. Ethan didn't fight anymore. He slumped, letting himself be dragged out of the private dining room, past the stunned staff, and into the corridor. The door closed behind them with a solid, heavy click. The room was quiet. The only sound was my mother's sobbing and the soft hum of the air conditioning system I had installed 3 years ago. I turned back to the table. I picked up my glass of wine. I looked at the wreckage of the dinner party. It was done. The weed had been pulled. Now, all that was left was to see if the soil could be saved. The door to the corridor was still open, framing the spectacle of my brother's downfall like a tragic portrait. Ethan had stopped fighting the physical grip of Agent Miller, but he was still fighting the reality of the situation. He twisted his neck, his eyes wild and bloodshot, desperate to find an angle, a loophole, a person he could charm or bully into saving him. "You have to listen to me," Ethan shouted, his voice echoing off the marble floors of the hallway and bouncing back into the silent dining room. My father agreed. He gave verbal consent. "You can ask him. It is not theft if they give it to you." Agent Nadia Crane did not shout. She did not argue. She simply stopped walking, forcing Ethan to stop with her. She turned him around so he was facing the room, facing us, one last time. She wanted him to see the witnesses. She wanted him to see the bridges he had burned. "Ethan Watson," Nadia said, her voice projecting with the clear, flat authority of the federal government. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and the misappropriation of funds from a protected elder. We have evidence of 17 structured transactions designed to evade reporting requirements, and we have forensic proof of forgery on loan documents totaling $250,000. "Dad," Ethan screamed, ignoring her, looking past her shoulder at the old man trembling by the table. "Dad, tell them you wanted to help me. Tell them you trust me." My father, Graham, looked at his son. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at the tears that were not tears of remorse, but tears of a narcissist who had finally been denied his reflection. Dad opened his mouth, his instinct to protect his child warring with the brutal truth laid out on the table. I stepped in. I moved physically between my father and the door, blocking Ethan's view of his victim. "He agreed to let you manage his money." "Ethan," I said, my voice carrying to the door. "He agreed because he thought you were a professional. He agreed when he thought he was signing for tax optimization. He did not agree to be your collateral. A signature obtained by lie is not consent. It is a trap, and Dad is done walking into it." Ethan let out a sound of pure frustration, a guttural growl. You poisoned him against me, you— That is enough, Agent Crane said. She tugged on his arm. You have the right to remain silent. Mr. Watson, I suggest you start using it immediately. As they began to drag him away again, I turned back to the table. Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance were standing there, their briefcases clutched to their chests like shields. They looked horrified. They looked like men who realized they had been swimming in a shark tank without a cage. They looked at me. They were waiting for me to scream, or to gloat, or to break down. Gentlemen, I said calmly, I believe Mr. Halden warned you earlier. My brother's company is a shell. The assets are inflated, and the liabilities are hidden in family accounts. I gestured to the door where Ethan was disappearing. If you proceed with this merger, I continued, you will not be acquiring a partner. You will be acquiring a federal investigation. You will be acquiring subpoenas. You will be acquiring the kind of stain that does not wash out of a reputation. Mr. Sterling swallowed hard. He adjusted his tie. Ms. Watson, we had no idea. The due diligence reports were fiction, Lawrence Halden said from the corner of the room. And now you know the author. Mr. Sterling nodded. He looked at me with a newfound respect. The kind of respect men in suits give to someone who has just saved them millions of dollars. Thank you, Sterling said. We will be terminating discussions effective immediately. They didn't wait for dessert. They walked out of the service exit, avoiding the spectacle in the hallway, disappearing into the night to call their legal teams. That left the family, or what remained of it. My mother, Cynthia, was still sitting in her chair. She looked small. The imperious, demanding woman who had criticized my clothes and my career for 2 decades had vanished. In her place was a terrified old woman who had bet everything on a fantasy and lost. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. He is your brother, she whispered. How could you? They will put him in prison. Chloe, prison. He put himself there. Mom, I said. He spent the money. He forged the names. But we could have fixed it, she insisted, her voice rising to a thin, hysterical pitch. We could have paid it back later. Why did you have to expose him? Why did you have to ruin him? I walked over to her. I didn't yell. I didn't feel the need to. The anger that had burned in me for years had cooled into something hard and unbreakable, like tempered steel. You knew, I said. You knew he was taking the money. You knew he mortgaged the condo. I believed in him, she cried. I believed in his numbers. He showed me the projections. I leaned down, placing my hands on the table, forcing her to look at me. That is the problem, Mom, I said softly. You looked at the projections. I looked at the theft. You looked at the suit. I looked at the man. I paused, letting the words sink in. Tell me, Mom, when you signed those papers, when you let him take Dad's safety net, did you trust the numbers, or did you trust the person? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She closed it again. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had signed away her husband's security, because she wanted to be the mother of a CEO. You chose the title. I answered for her. And now you have to live with the cost. I turned away from her. She was not the enemy anymore. She was just a casualty. I went to my father. He was standing by the window, looking out at the darkness. He looked frail, shaken by the violence of the truth. Dad, I said gently. He turned to me. I don't have anything left. Chloe, do I? The retirement. The house, he took it all. No, I said. He tried to. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the document I had obtained from the lender that afternoon. I handed it to him. This is the release of lien, I said. The house is paid off. I went to the lender today. It is yours again, free and clear. Nobody can take it. He stared at the paper. His hands shook as he read the paid in full stamp. And the rest, he asked. How do we live? I set up a trust, I said. It is in your name, but I am the trustee. Mom can't touch it. Ethan can't touch it. I put enough in there to cover your expenses for the next 2 years. You are safe, Dad. I promise you. As long as I am standing, you are safe. He looked at me. He looked at the failure daughter. He looked at the gardener. And for the first time in 20 years, he saw me. He saw the strength that comes from working with resistance, from building things that last. You did this, he whispered, with your money, from the landscaping, from the business. I corrected him gently. From Watson Grounds and Civic Design. He nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The way he held that piece of paper was enough. Wait, Sloane's voice cut in. I had almost forgotten she was there. My sister-in-law was standing near the door, her purse clutched tightly under her arm. She had stopped crying. Her survival instinct had kicked in. If the house is paid off, Sloane said, her eyes darting around. And if the partners are gone, maybe it is not that bad. Maybe we can get him a lawyer. Maybe we can say it was a misunderstanding. She was already plotting. She was already trying to figure out how to spin this, how to save her social standing. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. It is over, Sloane, I said. There is no spin. But it is just his word against ours, she argued. Unless they have proof of intent, unless they have a recording or something. I smiled. I reached into my portfolio one last time. I pulled out a cream-colored envelope. I didn't hand it to her. I held it up. Do you know why I chose the gilded atrium for this dinner? I asked. Sloane blinked. Because it is expensive. Because I built it, I said. I pointed to the ceiling, to the discreet vents hidden within the crown molding. I pointed to the living wall of greenery on the far side of the room. My firm designed the interior environmental systems for this hotel, I said. We installed the humidity sensors. We installed the irrigation. And because these private rooms are used for high-level corporate deals, the hotel required a security redundancy. I tapped the envelope against my palm. I still hold the maintenance contract. Sloane, I have admin access to the entire building management system. That includes the security feeds for the private dining rooms. Sloane went pale. Everything Ethan said tonight, I said. Every confession, every threat, the way he admitted to the forgery, the way he blamed you for the Nevada Shell Company, the way he begged me to cover his theft. I dropped the envelope onto the table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. It is all on the server, and 5 minutes ago, I forwarded the link to Agent Crane. Sloane stared at the envelope as if it were radioactive. You recorded him, she whispered. I didn't come here to hear him tell stories, I said, my voice hard. I came here to document the truth. That was the end. The last thread of hope for them snapped. Sloane didn't say another word. She didn't look at my mother. She didn't look at my father. She pulled out her phone, dialed a number her lawyer, presumably, and walked out the door. She moved fast, her heels clicking on the floor, running away from the wreckage of her marriage before the dust even settled. My mother slumped into her chair, putting her head in her hands. She was finally, truly silent. The posture was gone. The pretense was gone. She was just an old woman sitting in the ruins of her own favoritism. I looked around the room. The waiter was standing in the corner, trying to be invisible. The food was cold. The wine was untouched. Let's go, Dad, I said. Yes, he said. Let's go. As we walked toward the door, I saw a figure standing in the shadows of the hallway. It was Kyle. He hadn't left the building. He had been hovering, watching the arrest, watching the partners leave. He looked like a ghost, pale and insubstantial. When he saw me, he stepped forward. He looked at my dress. He looked at the way I held myself. He looked at the power that radiated off me. Power that didn't come from a title or a husband, but from competence. Chloe, he stammered. I just wanted to say I am sorry. About earlier, I didn't know you were, the way you handled that. It was incredible. He gave a nervous, hopeful smile. Maybe I was wrong about the career thing, he said. Maybe we could grab a coffee sometime, catch up. I would love to hear more about your company. It sounds substantial. I stopped. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had defined my worth by my job description for 3 years. Kyle, I said. Yeah. You are exactly the same. I said. You haven't changed at all. You just follow the money. That is not fair, he protested weakly. I just want to... But there is one difference, I interrupted. 3 years ago, I would have tried to prove you wrong. I would have showed you my balance sheet. I would have tried to make you see me. I stepped past him. Tonight, I said, not looking back. I don't need to prove anything to you. You are just background noise. I walked past him, leaving him standing in the hallway with his mouth open, a man who had realized too late that he had thrown away a diamond because he thought it was a rock. I took my father's arm. We walked through the lobby of the hotel, past the fountain I had designed, past the guests who were laughing and drinking, oblivious to the tragedy that had just played out upstairs. We pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the night. The air was cold. It bit at my bare arms, but it felt good. It felt clean. The wind whipped my hair back, stripping away the scent of the hotel's perfume and the stale smell of greed. The city lights were bright around us. Skyscrapers rose up like canyons, steel and glass reaching for the stars. My father stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at me. He looked down at my hands, my strong, capable hands that were currently manicured, but underneath, still knew the feel of the earth. "I am sorry, Chloe," he said. "I am so sorry." "It is okay, Dad," I said. "We are going to be okay." I looked down at my hands, too. I thought about the dirt. I thought about the mud. I thought about the things people walked on, the things people ignored, the things people scraped off their shoes. They laughed at the dirt. They mocked the labor. They thought power lived in the penthouse. But they were wrong. I looked up at the skyline, at the magnificent buildings that held the masters of the universe. "There are people who laugh at the mud," I said softly, my voice lost to the wind, meant only for me. "They laugh at the dirt and the digging, but they don't know." I squeezed my father's hand and began to lead him toward my truck. "That the mud is the only thing holding the whole city up. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed seeing Chloe tear down the facade and expose the truth, please let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from right now? Are you listening on your commute? At work? Or maybe while working in your own garden? I would love to hear your thoughts on Chloe's revenge. Please don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to know that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. See you in the next story.